Beartooth Wilderness Bill, and I was helping to organize support for the legislation. And in comes this wild man literally walking out of the wilderness, and I was so impressed by this guy. Obviously pretty young at the time, and he looked like he had just been hewn out of Montana granite, and just come out of the wilderness, just completely just as raw and wild as you can imagine. And he gave some of the most powerful testimony I have ever heard in defense of wilderness, because he had been there, living there, and being part of it, and really experiencing it. And that's been the story of his life. I really consider George to be America's wilderness ambassador. He has been in more wilderness areas. There's, I think, 806 in our National Wilderness Preservation System. He's probably been in over half of them, more than anyone I know of, and then some. He's written 38 books, many incredible titles on subjects ranging from energy to thrillcraft to wilderness to geographic books across the North American continent, from East Coast to West Coast, Alaska, you name it. It's just overpowering to even try to remember all the titles. He's the most prolific writer I know, cranking out column after column every day. And he's just a bundle of kinetic energy that I expect to explode at any minute. So if in the middle of the presentation George disintegrates, you'll understand why. Anyway, we are very, very fortunate to have this, my hero.
Good Lord.
Thank you.
So, let's see. I'll mention one extra thing. The hearing in Billings, what happened was I backpacked from Cook City to Red Lodge, and I realized that was the day the hearing was happening. So I hitchhiked into Billings, and I just showed up, with my pack on and shorts and climbing shoes and so forth, and gave my testimony there without having taken a shower in a week. So. Okay, later on you might have time to come look at this stuff, but let's start with this thing. Let's see. So the Gallatin Range is part of the whole Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, but the northern part of the ecosystem, this is the largest chunk of land that's unprotected in that northern ecosystem. So there's the sort of Beartooth Wilderness, Lee Metcalf Wilderness, and the green there, most of you probably know this, but the Gallatin Range runs from Bozeman south into Yellowstone Park, and it continues down and through this part of the park here, like Electric Peak by Gardner is the highest peak in the Gallatin Range, just under it's 11,000, just under 11,000 feet. And so it's a major contributor to wildlife, and I'll show you some of this in a minute. So what are the most important values on the Custer-Gallatin National Park? I would argue they're watershed, wildlife, and wildlands, not lumber, not mining, not recreation, any of those other things. This is what I feel like the Gallatin Forest should make as its primary emphasis of management. Because there's, when you compare it to any place else in the country, there's nothing that's better than here, So it's also one of the more spectacular areas in the National Forest. So this is from a peak in the Gallatin Range. You can see it's been heavily glaciated in the past. It's a weird mix of geology. There's a lot of the Absaroka volcanics that cover it, but also places where granite sticks out, too. So you get both kinds of rocks evident. And as I mentioned, it goes down to Electric Peak by Gardner, right there, and starts there at Highlight Reservoir, is part of the northern part. And some little history. In 1910, Gifford Pinchot, who was the first chief of the Forest Service, urged the creation of a wildlife refuge in the Gallatin Range. And he said, "I hope the day will never come when the sound of the axe, the purr and putt of a gas vehicle will be heard to destroy the beauty and solitude of this beautiful creation." So, you hear a lot of bad things about Gifford Pinchot, but, he was on the right track on certain things, and certainly when it came to the Gallatin Range. So, And then in 1958, the Forest Service proposed logging the Upper Gallatin. It spurred the formation of the Montana Wilderness Association. And this was before the 64 Wilderness Act had been established. And as some of you know, a variety of people got together in Bozeman to start the MWA. And this was the first thing. They were concerned about the Madison Range and the Gallatin Range. So I'm trying to show that it's had a focus of conservation interest for a long time. And then in 1977, Lee Metcalf succeeded in passing Senate 393, and it created 10 wilderness study areas in Montana, and one of them was the Gallatin Range. And it was called the Highlight Porcupine, I gotta always read this, Highlight Porcupine Buffalo Williams Study Area, and it had 155,000 acres in it. And this gets into the controversy I'm going to talk about a little bit, with efforts by other groups right now to eliminate some of the area that's protected by the S393. And I will argue that it should be, depending upon how you interpret things, the way it's being managed by the Forest Service now is probably illegal, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But anyway, in the 1980s, when we were trying to get the Lee Metcalf Wilderness established, there was a proposal that had 600,000 acres in total, and including the Gallatin Range as part of that. But it got eliminated because Senator Melcher did not like Lee Metcalf and didn't want to have a huge area set aside honoring Metcalf. So Melcher used the checkerboard ownership, and I think most of you know about the railroad checkerboards on a lot of lands, and the Gallatin Range had a lot of it. But this is in the Madison Range, in the Monument Peak unit of the Madison Range, Lee Metcalf Wilderness, looking across to the Gallatin Range. So it's just right across the valley there. And in 2002, myself with 3 other friends of mine, we published a multi-criteria assessment of vulnerability and irreplaceability of sites in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We worked on that for 2 years. But anyway, the Upper Gallatin was identified by us as one of the most important biological areas in the whole Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So by a bunch of criteria we use, like rare plants, rare animals, threats, other things in this assessment. And it goes without saying that it's also one of the best wildlife habitats in Montana. You have an elk migration route that comes out of Yellowstone Park, like in this diagram here. Also critical grizzly bear habitat, bighorn sheep, moose, wolf, deer, just about every species that's in the northern Rockies can be found here. And recently, for better or for worse, mountain goats have migrated to here from the Exarca Verde, so now we have mountain goats over here too. So, the most important drainage, and this gets into some of the controversy, is the Buffalo Horn drainage, which is right adjacent to Yellowstone Park. So it forms the Forest Service, Park Service boundary. And part of the reason it's important is it has a lot of low elevation area. It's not just the high peaks. And it goes all the way down to the highway that goes, between Big Sky and West Yellowstone. And it has a lot of meadows in it. And some of the densest grizzly bear habitat outside of Yellowstone Park. And it has all sorts of predators there. And bighorn sheep. Okay, and then it also has, the Gallatin River has West Slope cutthroat trout, and the tributaries on this side have Yellowstone cutthroat trout, both of which are considered sensitive species in Montana. And then it's also an area I think you could sustain hundreds of bison, if they were allowed to get out of Yellowstone, could colonize a lot of this area. And so, what are the threats? They include logging, more so now since the Forest Service is pushing logging, and then recreation places, rural sprawl on private lands, abutting up to the mountain. And the sprawl has an indirect effect because the Forest Service uses that as an excuse to do logging to prevent fires from burning down houses. So, like where we are right now, frankly. So this is one of the problems with that. So the other thing to keep in mind, I like to point out that the Wilderness Act is the gold standard for conservation. And most of you know this is for a general audience, but mechanical access isn't allowed. and logging, etc. And this is some logging that happened just outside of Bozeman in the Kirk Creek area. But this is an example of the thinning kind of stuff that has gone on in some of these areas right now. So one of the more recent issues that's come up is the Forest Service wants to cut trees in South Cottonwood drainage. And the South Cottonwood drainage was a big issue in the 1990s because at that time it had checkerboard ownership, which has been eliminated. But at that time, Burlington Northern was planning to log this drainage. And because of public outcry and a whole lot of resistance from locals and national attention, Senator Baucus was able to arrange a trade to get rid of the Burlington Northern section with the idea that this would be designated wilderness at some point. And so this just shows you what the drainage looks like. And I'll get into that more. So anyway, the Gallatin Range is the largest unprotected wilderness area in the northern Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And there are approximately 250,000 acres of roadless land that would qualify for wilderness. And depending upon where you are and where you draw the boundaries, you could get a little bit more, or you could get less too, but we're trying to promote the idea that there should be 250,000 acres protected. So the opposite of that is what's called the Greater Yellowstone Conservation and Recreation Act, and supported by GY's Greater Yellowstone Coalition, the Wilderness Society, Wild Montana, Southwest Mountain Bike Association, and other groups. And this is a result of what they call the Gallatin Forest Partnership. And it would designate 102,000 acres in the Gallatin Range. Remember, the S393 area is 155,000 acres. Our proposal is 250,000 acres. So, a substantial reduction. And I'll explain why this is a reduction in protection in a bit. But it also would create in the Buffalo Horn Porcupine area, this area right here, there's Big Sky, right across from Big Sky, what they call wildlife conservation areas. And one of the problems with that is it's a totally new designation. So we don't know how good it would stand up to any kind of, lawsuits or any other things that go on. In theory, they say that it would require the Forest Service to monitor use to make sure that wildlife is not disproportionately hurt or whatever. But it would allow mountain biking, motorbike, snow machines, dirt bikes in there, as well as logging under emergency situations like that. So anyway, and then they have also a West Pine recreation area, and then the Highlight Canyon area would become a recreation area. So that's what the legislation would do. And so how would that affect things? Well, the pink in here, as in this chart, are areas that currently are in the Senate 393 legislation, the Montana Wilderness Study Act. And so the northern half and the southern half primarily, you see, and this is Buffalo Horn, Porcupine there, that's the Highlight Canyon and West Pine, would be eliminated by these other designations. And in particular, that would affect things like the migration through the Buffalo Horn, Porcupine area.
George, I have to interrupt you, please.
Yeah.
I don't understand something.
Yeah.
You said pink. You said pink area? What?
Red.
Oh, you're meaning red.
Red.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Okay, so
Yeah.
would you explain that again, please?
Okay, yeah, these would, if this legislation is passed, that they're being pushed, we would eliminate, the 393 area is this black line that I have on.
Right.
Okay, so that's 155,000 acres. The red would eliminate from that 155,000 acres and only have 102,000 acres left as wilderness.
And the other stuff would be what's left?
What would be, the red stuff, it would be designated these, wildlife conservation areas, recreation areas, and so forth. So, and to show the emphasis, I just got this off of Gallatin Forest Partnership. I mean, what's the thing that they emphasize? You know, I mean, like, this is the best wildlife habitat in the country. This is some of the wildest landscape in the country. And what they put in is their premier picture to emphasize what's valuable about this thing. It's mountain biking. And, you know, it just behooves me that this is the way the emphasis has gone. And so, anyway, you know, I gotta tell you, it took an
Big
hour.
Sky Money Talks.
Yeah, this took me an hour to figure out how to copy this. I'm so bad. But I got it, so I copied it. All right, so I mentioned it would eliminate WSA status from the South Cottonwood Ranges. South Cottonwood, this is the Porcupine Buffalo Horn area. And I'm gonna get to it in here, but I'll just get to it right now. Senate 393, the Wilderness Study Act, says that until Congress decides otherwise, this is supposed to be managed for its wilderness characteristics, okay? So if this legislation passes, then that's why we're concerned. You lose the protection, which is not being enforced, which I'll get to in a moment, but nevertheless, there's a possibility for suing the Forest Service for how it's managing these areas, because they're failing to protect it right now, okay? But that's what the language says. So this is the 393, this is the legislative boundary. There's my son when he was 2 years old, hiking up in the Gallatin Range. So, this is what it says. It says the wilderness study areas designated by this act shall, and shall is a very important thing if you follow Congress, because it means you don't have discretion. See, if they say, you know, best, or you know, other qualifying words that aren't shall means a lot. It says, so Secretary of Agriculture to maintain the presently existing wilderness character and potential inclusion in national wilderness preservation system. So this is 1977, and this is when I was hiking here, sheep hunting, and all this other stuff. There were no mountain bikes. There was no dirt bikes that could get up there at that time. You know, the technology has changed a lot. But in other words, even if you said, oh, we're going to allow those things because there was a few of them around, it still wasn't many. And it's changed entirely since then. And so the Forest Service in its own forest plan identified 251,000 acres of roadless in the wilderness inventory in this area. So we're not far off with our proposal for 250,000 acres. It's just basically saying what the Forest Service says, that this area could qualify. And so the other thing that's problematic is, as I said, these are next to Yellowstone, but you know, Big Sky's right across the street, so to speak, from these areas. And, you know, things are growing like crazy in Big Sky, more and more people there, more and more recreation. So this place is vulnerable to being totally overrun in the future if it doesn't stay as wilderness. So back in 2019, I was able to get all these people to sign a letter saying that supported wilderness in the Gallatin Range. We published it in the Bozeman Chronicle as an ad, and including I got Secretary of Interior Bruce Babbitt to sign on to it, a bunch of other luminaries. And so anyway, that was a significant step. It didn't change the thing as far as the other groups are concerned. But anyway, I would argue we need to protect these lands for wildlife, ecosystem integrity, carbon storage, and for future generations. And that's my son again. And West Pine drainage in the Gallatin Range. And I think that's one more here. And so the Gallatin Yellowstone Wilderness Alliance supports 250,000 acres for wilderness. And this is a map of all the roadless stuff that's in the northern part of the Gallatin Range, as you can see. Quite a bit up this in the northern part of the AB Wilderness, but over by Red Lodge. This is the Pryor Mountains out here. So a lot of work to still be done with the Custer Gallatin National Forest as far as I'm concerned.
A couple of things. I'm wondering about enforcement of the SB 93.
Let me get, that's a good question. So, as background, the Bitterroot National Forest had two wilderness study areas from 393, Blue Joint and Sapphire. And they were both getting mountain bikes and dirt bikes and snowmobiles in the boundaries of the S393 areas. And the Forest Service, I'm not sure whether the Forest Service was sued by the Friends of the Bitterroot or just eventually got on the right track. But in any event, they decided that that language that I had about shall protect the wilderness qualities meant that they couldn't allow these things anymore. And the mountain bikers and others took the Bitterroot National Forest to court. And the court decision that came out saying that the Forest Service had the authority by that legislation to protect the wilderness quality of the blue joint and the sapphire. Now, I'm not an expert on legal stuff, but it always seems to me if it's good enough for the Bitterroot National Park, it should be good enough for the Gallatin National Forest too. And so that's the argument that we'd like to make in a legal case. And this is the problem with the Gallatin Forest Partnership. The groups that have all the money, like GYC and the Wilderness Society and all that, I think they should be the ones that should be going to court and making this argument. And they have no interest in doing that. And if you could win that argument, then you'd have this area set aside at least until legislation were to pass. If legislation passes, that nullifies the wilderness study status.
And that is, the language says that the Forest Service shall maintain the potential for inclusion within the wilderness system. What the Forest Service argument has been to allow non-conforming uses like motorized recreation has been that, well, the land is still there. We're not building roads. We're not cutting trees down. The land is still there. We're not reducing the potential. And of course, the counter argument is that by allowing uses that would otherwise be prohibited within wilderness, they are in fact reducing the potential for inclusion. Right. Because the inclusion within the wilderness system is entirely a political process. It's 100% politics. And so if you're allowing anti-wilderness interests to dominate the landscape in what is otherwise protected land, well then you're obviously reducing the potential for inclusion within the wilderness system.